Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
A few hours after the Israeli forces withdrew from the Ta al-Sultan neighborhood, thousands of people marched on the streets of Rafah to participate in the funeral procession of 16 Palestinians killed during the Israeli military operations in the area. Now, to a reporter in Rafah, Hazim Badaro.
After a week of incursions in the Ta al-Sultan neighborhood in western Rafah, the occupation forces withdrew from the area, leaving behind grave damages, especially to the neighborhood's infrastructure. They bulldozed all the streets, causing traffic problems. In addition, houses were greatly damaged. The occupation forces completely destroyed 3 homes. Many other houses are on the verge of collapse and are no longer suitable for living. Nevertheless, the Palestinians remain steadfast and insist on staying on their land.
We felt the house shake, so we held up white flags, but they did not respond. They continued to move with their bulldozer, so we grabbed the young ones and started running. They continued to bulldoze, and if we didn't leave, the young ones may have been bulldozed too.
This is the product of 30 years of work, a home that houses 15 people. My hard work and the loans I took from the bank and the agency. I'm still making payments on the loan. Only God knows of my situation.
We will remain steadfast and stay on our land. We will not leave. Should he try his entire life to make us leave, we won't. He can send airplanes, tanks, whatever he pleases. Even if he tries to destroy everything, we will not leave.
After the occupation forces withdrew from the Ta al-Sultan neighborhood, the Palestinians began burying 16 martyrs, including 5 children who were killed in the area. Tens of thousands of people joined in the funeral procession amidst feelings of sorrow and anger. The crowds of people denounced the Israeli massacre. Meanwhile, many homes in Rafah are mourning the dead, such as this one, losing 2 of its family members.
5 missiles hit the door of the mosque. My sons rushed to help after seeing bodies scattered on the ground. They wanted to remove them. A missile hit one of them, and he was killed. The other joined the civil defense and was martyred while resisting.
The Israeli war machine's destruction was not limited to human beings, but also reached the trees. Israeli bulldozers raised vast amounts of agricultural land, which is a source of income for many people in Rafah.
There is here about 30 dunams of greenhouses that feeds about 20 families. They destroyed it without warning. No one was shooting at them. They claim to be fighting terrorism. Where is the terrorism? This terrorism is committed by the Zionists. It is state-sponsored terrorism against our source of living.
The occupation forces are depriving the children in Rafah from playing and having fun after destroying their playground.
We had a playground, but the Jews destroyed it. Our children have the right to play. The Jews committed this criminal act, destroying our playground.
The Israeli withdrawal from some areas does not mean that the operations have ended. According to Israeli military officials, Operation Rainbow will continue to hit certain targets. The funerals of the martyrs of Ta al-Sultan are being held in Rafah after the occupation forces redeployed in the area. Meanwhile, Israeli operations are ongoing in the Brazil district, and the residents of the Rafah refugee camp continue to suffer from this tragedy. Hazim Badaro, Abu Dhabi TV, Ta al-Sultan neighborhood, Rafah.
Blew up outside Baghdad's foreign ministry on Monday, close to the Green Zone and the so-called Coalition Provisional Authority, both housing the U.S. occupation military and civil administration. 4 people were killed in the blast, and it was not immediately clear if the explosion was caused by a bomb or a rocket-propelled grenade. There was another blast earlier in the day on a main road eastern of Baghdad, Witnesses there said they saw the charred bodies of 3 people inside the car, which blew up when a roadside bomb exploded on a main road in eastern Baghdad. And in more developments, 2 U.S. occupation soldiers were killed when their convoy was targeted in the western Iraqi town of Fallujah. Meanwhile, the U.S. military bombed the holy city of Najaf, causing casualties among Iraqi civilians after American soldiers desecrated the sanctity of the Holy Mosque and massacred 32 Iraqis inside and injured at least 54 others.
Soldiers were killed in a roadside bomb attack near the Iraqi city of Fallujah, where several other U.S. forces were also injured. The U.S. military also reported that 4 soldiers were injured by a roadside bomb and 4 others by mortar attacks on a military facility in Baghdad on Sunday. Another soldier was injured by small arms fire when resistance fighters attacked his convoy northeast of the capital. The last 2 killed occupation soldiers brought the U.S. military death toll in Iraq to 796 since the start of the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq in March 2003. U.S. aggressions meanwhile continued against holy cities. American occupation tanks and artillery bombed the Mink Market and the Midan Square in the holy city of Najaf. 1 shell landed near the Golden Domes Hotel, where many journalists stay. 7 Iraqis were injured in the bombing, while U.S. snipers shot dead an Iraqi civilian in the 1920 square. This aggression was an extension to a U.S. occupation massacre and desecration of yet another holy site in Najaf. American soldiers, tanks and warplanes raided the Holy Mosque. American soldiers destroyed the Holy Mosque's main gate and opened fire against everyone inside, killing 32 Iraqis and injuring 54 others, some seriously. Casualties were rushed to Najaf Hospital to be treated, but health officials warned that the lack of medical supplies will lead to a potential humanitarian catastrophe. This has led Sheikh Mansour al-Asadi, head of the Central Council of Tribes in the Najaf area, to say that he was astonished over the Kufa raid, saying it undermined efforts by local leaders to resolve the standoff between the U.S. occupation and Al-Mahdi army fighters. In more developments, our correspondents in occupied Iraq reported that clashes renewed in the southern city in Baghdad between U.S. soldiers and resistance fighters.
As a videotape of the Iraqi wedding that never ended happily emerged, U.S. Brigadier General Mark Hummett described what was going on as mere bad people celebrating, consequently justifying his army's massacre last Thursday that killed 45 people, including many children, as well as the bride and the groom of the Mughred Deep area near the borders with Syria.
U.S. intelligence again interpreted a gathering of jubilant Iraqi men, women and children in a traditional tribal wedding ceremony to be what intel personnel often call safe house of foreign fighters in the Mughred Deep area near the Iraqi borders with Syria. In this so-called safe house of foreign fighters, folklore dances were held in which this brother and his sister took part before they were both torn into pieces by U.S. bombs that indiscriminately showered the wedding site for many hours, rendering it a devastated zone. But the 45 people killed in the U.S. air raid, including a large number of children, were, according to Brigadier General Mark Hummett, bad people having a party.
We are persuaded that there was not a wedding going on. There may have been some kind of celebration. Bad people have celebrations too. Bad people have parties too. And it may have been that what was seen as some sort of celebration or spoken to as a celebration may have just been a meeting in the middle of the desert by some people that were conducting either criminal or terrorist activities.
But Kimmett's claims that there were no signs of a wedding, along with the many assumptions he made, were obviously far from being realistic, as footage of the wedding taking place were real, and the bride, that along with her groom never made it alive the U.S. raid, was seen preparing herself to take off to the groom's tent where the wedding was supposed to take place, but it didn't. The gifts and the blankets that were supposed to be given to the marrying couple were scattered on the massacre scene. Monitors are questioning the feasibility of a U.S. military intelligence in occupied Iraq that has so far failed in providing reliable information for the U.S. occupation forces and succeeded in nothing but sponsoring and documenting the disgraceful abuse of Iraqi prisoners, in US-run prisons.
Meanwhile, Arab leaders or heads of state meeting in Tunis concluded their two-day summit Sunday, stressing on the Arab states' commitment to the international legitimacy to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict, as well as on the necessity of the Israeli withdrawal from all occupied Arab territories. Arab leaders concluded a two-day summit with declarations committing their countries to reform to counter a soon-to-be unveiled U.S. proposal and calls for reactivating Mideast peace initiatives. But the annual gathering, already delayed by 2 months amid sharp differences over the agenda, was marked by the walkout of Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi, the no-show of 8 others, and the departure of 4 even before the curtain came down. The summit criticized any attempts to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict without reference to all UN resolutions. And that was an indirect rebuke to US President George W. Bush, who in April gave Israeli Prime Minister Ariel Sharon assurances that contradict UN resolutions on Palestinian refugees and international law on settling the occupied territory. The United States, without withdrawing the concessions to Israel, later said the negotiations would settle such matters. And the summit also expressed solidarity with Syria in the face of U.S. economic sanctions. On Iraq, a Tunis declaration summarizing the views of the leaders said the United Nations should have a central and effective role in order to end the occupation and arrange the stages of transferring sovereignty to the Iraqi people. It did not call for an immediate end to the U.S.-led occupation or set any timetable for restoring sovereignty, however.
We are committed to the Palestinian cause, and we are looking for a solution in the framework of the Arab Initiative and the roadmap, and with the world community in protecting the Palestinians from the killings and dislocation they are facing, and to find a solution to the Israeli killings of Palestinian political leaders and the killing of innocent civilians without any reason. The Arab group agrees to the unity of Iraq and its land and respects its sovereignty, and we call on the UN Security Council to give the United Nations a strong and lead role in Iraq to end the occupation and preparation of the handover of power to the people to ensure peace and the rebuilding of Iraq. We, the Arab states, are united with Syria against the US-imposed sanctions and to assure that lack of talks and understanding to solve the differences between nations will lead to more tension and lack of stability.
In separate detailed resolutions, the Arab countries said they condemned the inhumane and unethical crimes and practices committed by troops of the occupation forces against Iraqi detainees, and that both the perpetrators and those responsible for the abuses should face trial. They also condemned the excessive use of force by the occupation forces.
الاغتيالات التي تنتهجها إسرائيل ضد القيادات.
4 down and 1 to go. Lebanese have elected new municipalities and local council chiefs across southern Lebanon and Nabatea, with a mixed basket of preliminary results. Next week, voters will take to the polls in the final round of municipal elections in northern Lebanon. Some 65% of registered voters cast their ballots across southern Lebanon and Nabatea. Both governorates witnessed heated electoral battles. In the city of Sidon, where 60% of eligible voters took to the poll, an electoral alliance supported by Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri and the Jama'ah Islamiyah was defeated by a ticket supported by Osama Saad and Dr. Abdurrahman Bizri. It was a tense electoral day, with Hariri supporters reporting back-to-back minor assaults on them by Saad backers. Further south, in the port city of Tyre, House Speaker Nabih Berri's Amal movement hammered home a major victory over Hezbollah in a tense race that pitted both rival Shiite movements for the region's second-largest city. Berri's Amal teamed up with the Communist Party and the Popular Base for MP Ali Khalil to defeat an alliance by Hezbollah, the Al-Khalili clan, and Christian opposition movements. Hezbollah had dealt Amal a major blow in the Bekaa Valley and Beirut's southern suburbs in previous rounds of elections. Amal took on coastal towns and villages, but Hezbollah had clean victories enjoyed in the zone that was formerly occupied by Israel. Amal said it won 90 out of 247 municipalities, with the others going mainly to Hezbollah. In the electoral flashpoint city of Nabatea, an alliance supported by the Amal-backed Sheikh Abdel Hussein Sadiq managed to secure 5 seats in a 21-person council, mainly dominated by Hezbollah. In Bazuriya, Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah's home village, a ticket supported by Amal swept to victory. In the mainly Christian enclave of Jazin, the opposition was dealt a severe blow, following the victory of an alliance supported by MP Samir Azar. To the east, in Hasbaya, Druze MP and Minister Talal Arslan defeated the ticket backed by Druze chief MP Wali Jumblat. Arslan was supported by the Syrian Social Nationalist Party. At a news conference that followed Election Day, Interior Minister Ilyas Moore described the process as democratic. He praised security efforts.
The IDF further scaled back Operation Rainbow in the southern Gaza Strip today, although it continued efforts to find Palestinian terrorists and arms smuggling tunnels on the border with Egypt. Early this morning, Israeli forces lifted the siege of the Tel Sultan neighborhood in the Rafah refugee camp, which was the scene of intense fighting last week between Palestinian gunmen and IDF soldiers. More from Robert Sarner.
In the Rafah refugee camp in the southern Gaza Strip, IDF troops withdrew from one neighborhood this morning, leaving behind a sad sight. Residents in the Tel Sultan quarter surveyed the aftermath of the IDF offensive, which left dozens of homes destroyed or badly damaged. Tanks and troops that had encircled Tel Sultan, the site of last week's most deadly clashes, pulled out at dawn as the army continued to scale back its controversial Operation Rainbow. The army said that the pullout was part of a new deployment to ease conditions for residents of Tel Sultan, home to some 25,000 people. Nearby, the army continued to demolish homes in the Brazil neighborhood of Rafah on the border with Egypt, where soldiers are searching for arms smuggling tunnels. Meanwhile, late this morning, thousands of Palestinians took to the streets of Rafah to take part in funeral processions for 16 of those killed in the Israeli offensive, many of them Hamas and Islamic Jihad terrorists. Marchers, some of them armed, chanted routine pledges of bloody revenge against Israel. The IDF launched the operation last week to target Palestinian terrorists and to stop weapons smuggling in tunnels between Egypt and the Rafah refugee camp. So far, the army says that it has uncovered 2 tunnels in recent days. This is Robert Sarner for ID News.
Nuclear spy Mordechai Vanunu's libel case against the Yediot Ahronot newspaper began today at the Tel Aviv Magistrates Court. It was Vanunu's first public appearance since his release last month, following an 18-year prison sentence. Vanunu is suing the newspaper and journalist Ron Ben-Ishai for an article published 4.5 years ago that claimed he supplied Hamas terrorists with instructions on how to manufacture explosive devices. Ben-Ishai said that his information came from then head of the Shin Bet Security Services, Ami Ayalon, and was later confirmed by a source he refused to name. Ayalon is expected to testify along with Vanunu himself. Mordechai Vanunu is demanding 360,000 shekels in compensation.
The Center of Middle Eastern Studies held a conference in Ain Shams University on the effects of religion on Israel and the stalemate peace process. During the conference, presentations were given on the history and development of religious movements and parties in Israel and how they have affected the Middle East in general. The key to understanding Israel is to study the Jewish religion from an objective, non-judgmental angle. To understand the Jewish history, one must understand the Jewish religion and vice versa. Religion in Israel affects it internally and determines how it deals with others. Judaism and political Zionism are the two ends of the spectrum, though the distance between the two can be hard to measure even by those who established it. This idea was proposed by the Center for Middle Eastern Studies in a seminar titled Religion in Israel and Its Effects on Peace in the Middle East. Historically, the religious factor has affected the Palestinian question by creating fundamental understanding of the struggle and its legitimacy, such as the concept of the historical and religious purity of the Jewish race and the notion of the Promised Land. There are other religious beliefs that have affected recent negotiations, such as the story of the remains of the 6 Israeli military personnel. Israel's persistence on getting the body parts goes back to a religious belief. Jewish widows cannot remarry as long as the body parts of their dead husbands are not found, according to Jewish traditions. This explains why Israel was very patient in its attempts to figure out where the remains of the missing pilot Ron Arad were. This fact was observed by Lebanese and Palestinian fighters, which explains why they tried to use the remains of Israeli soldiers as a bargaining chip. Israel has always been proud of being the only country that has no memorial site for unknown soldiers.
The situation in Israel is clear. It is not unclear. It is clear that there is a general tendency in Israel to move toward the extreme right. If we were to divide the religious movements in Israel, we would find right-wing religious movements, moderate religious movements, and left-wing religious movements. However, most of the Israelis now stand behind Sharon with the objective of maintaining the ultimate goal and fundamental basis of Israel. The study confirms that the Israelis are attached to the land and insists on not allowing the refugees to return. Also, peace is increasingly less important in the eyes of the religious movements. This gives Sharon power and helps him inside the government. 4 ministers in the Israeli government are religious. Religious parties also have about 22 seats in the Israeli Knesset.
The conflict is not only based on inherited religious texts, but it is also based on how these texts are interpreted and used to fuel the conflict. This is evident in Israel's policy, propaganda, and negotiations during peace and war. Cairo, Kamil Hanafi, 9 News Channel.
At the United Nations, the United States and its ally Britain released a new draft UN Security Council resolution on Iraq. The new U.S. drafted resolution endorses sovereignty for an Iraqi caretaker government and gives a mandate for foreign troops to remain in the country for at least a year. The measure seeks UN approval for a U.S.-led multinational force with a review after a year, but does not give an expiration date for the force. The measure says Iraqi could ask for a review earlier than that, although the Council does not have to agree to withdraw the troops. The resolution would also hand over oil revenues to a new Iraqi interim government, not yet formed, but give an international board to audit spending of oil proceeds. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Gerhard Schröder urged the United States to push through a comprehensive transfer of power to Iraq's interim government, including control over the country's resources and security. He doubted that a NATO presence could increase the level of security and appeal to Islamic nations to participate in a potential United Nations force in Iraq. British Ambassador Emma Jones Perry told reporters that all sovereignty will be returned to the Iraqis.
It underlines clearly that all sovereignty will be returned to the Iraqis, but the interim Iraqi government will assume total responsibility for its own sovereignty. And secondly, that there will be a multinational force, but that multinational force will operate with the consent, in consultation and in partnership with the Iraqi government, and that in the political process which will now ensue, that the United Nations will have a leading role.
In the city of Fallujah, the final exams in primary, secondary, and high schools start again. This comes as the city experiences some stability in the past days, relative to security, which returned to the city as the Iraqi army and policy took control there. After Fallujah experienced an emergency situation, normal life has returned to the city, where students began returning to their local schools for the start of exams and continuing education.
Of course, the final exams have begun. We are determined to conduct these important exams with much resolve.
For the service of the beloved Iraq.
I'm an English language supervisor. I visited this school to supervise the exams taking place now. This school is in the Jolan neighborhood, which was subjected to a lot of damage. Thank God the exams are taking place in a good manner. I evaluated the studies and most of the students. The attendance is good.
Classes have now resumed after the recent fighting, and students are now allowed to continue their studies.
These are normal circumstances. The exams have returned and everything has returned to normal. Despite the events of Fallujah, and especially what happened in the Jolan neighborhood, everything has returned to normal.
The children's faces express their happiness. They have returned to school and play with their friends on the playground. Shoki Salih, Al-Araqiya, the city of Fallujah. In Baghdad, after the fall of the previous regime, the number of newspapers increased to more than 180, according to the latest survey. This has been a positive development for the media in Iraq, which has witnessed a wide opening of differing opinions. The television, radio, and print media has expanded in Iraq after the ousting of the previous regime. There are more than 180 local newspapers and more than 10 local and satellite television stations. Not to mention that a number of satellite stations are still under construction.
تعود المشاهد العراقي في الماضي على متابعة الأخبار.
In the past, the Iraqi viewer was used to following news and content from 2 TV channels or more. But now the number of local TV channels has increased.
محلية كانت أم وافدة وهذه ظاهرة.
I believe this is good and healthy for the Iraqis to see all the events and realities of the world, particularly Iraq.
والوقائع عبر العالم وفي العراق بشكل خاص.
The Arab satellite channels have also benefited from the atmosphere of freedom in Iraq, where offices have opened, giving opportunities for journalists to find work.
Without a doubt, the increasing perspectives are a benefit to the Iraqi citizen and a service to knowledge. It also is a service to television media because if we tried comparing the situation of the past to that of today, without a doubt, it is better today. First, at the level of finding information, we can begin to compare information with other television channels. I believe there isn't as much freedom over there as there is here in Iraq now.
The opening atmosphere of freedom in the media includes the new graduates who can obtain opportunities they would never have had before. The events of the past were buried with the seeds of the freedom of the press. Today, these seeds of freedom have grown into what is happening now. Ali Khaledi, Al-Araqiya.
The International Red Cross and the Amnesty International denounced the brutal practices carried out by the British occupation forces against the Iraqi prisoners in Qasr prison in Al-Basra. These practices led to the death of one Iraqi prisoner, Bahat Musa, who used to work in an Iraqi hotel. He's a father of 2 children who are just beginning their lives. Father of the martyr expressed his pain not only for the bitterness of losing his son and the agony of his grandchildren, but also because of the torture marks that were evident on his son's body when he received it. The Dutch Foreign Ministry announced that 2 Dutch nurses have treated 2 Iraqi prisoners who were mistreated by British soldiers during interrogation.
Mosaic is made possible by a grant from the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, which promotes journalism excellence worldwide and invests in the vitality of 26 U.S. communities, and the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation. Additional support is provided by the Firedoll Foundation and Henry and Virgilia Dakin.